Welcome to the Jockey Club, a podcast looking at the movie Let It Ride, one scene at a time. My name is Dan Delgado, and we're at historic Hialeah Park where one man is having the best day of his life.
I'm having a good day.
So come on in and hang out while we talk about this day and the greatest movie of all time, Let It Ride. Don't worry about that guy at the door. I've got you covered. You can even
take my seat to the Jockey Club.
Welcome back to the Jockey Club. And if you're going to listen to only one episode of this podcast, then this is the one to listen to. But really, listen to all of them. Today, joining me at my trackside table is none other than Let It Ride co-producer Randy Ostrow. And yes, we do touch on the seventh scene of the movie because, after all, this is a scene-by-scene look at the movie Let It Ride, but I'll be honest with you and just tell you that we spent most of the time discussing what it was like to produce this movie. And Randy is a very candid man, let me tell you. We discuss how Good Vibes became Let It Ride and what it was like to deal with producer David Giler, director Joe Pytka, and screenwriter Nancy Dowd, in addition to, of course, author Jay Cronley. All of these names have come up on this podcast at some point or another. So let's not waste any more time and get right out to the track and check out my conversation with Randy Ostrow.
Let me tell you.
Yeah.
The genesis of the project.
Yes, exactly.
I was ADing a slasher movie in Austin, Texas, and my friend Ned Dowd, whose sister Nancy Dowd wrote the script for Let It Ride, but she also wrote the script for Slapshot, which is the story of Ned Dowd's hockey career, basically.
Yes.
So I met Ned in 1981, and we were hanging around in 1985. He was doing a picture in Dallas. He was doing True Stories with David Byrne.
Yeah.
And I was doing a terrible, horrible, unwatchable slasher movie in Austin. And I drove up through Dallas on the way back to New York, and we were sitting around talking, complaining to each other about producers. And we made the newbie error of saying to one another, we'd be a lot better off if we made our own movie. And he said to me, he was a horse player.
Oh, okay.
He said to me, there's a book I just read that would make a really, really good movie.
Oh, no kidding.
It's called Good Vibes, and it's by a writer named Jay Cronley. So I said, all right, I'm game. I went back to New York.
Right.
Now, you talk about it having a hard time finding the book. First of all, I found out it wasn't Jay Connolly. It was Jay Cronley, who I'd never heard of. And second of all, when I went to the Strand bookstore on Broadway and 13th Street, I bought all 5 copies that were on the shelf. And I found out who Jay's agent was. He had an impressive agent in New York. I can't remember exactly who it was, but I remember the name was known. And I went in and I offered the money, and Ned and I paid to option Good Vibes. And it was just in time because we were the first people to option a Jay Cronley book. You may or may not know that right after we optioned Good Vibes for hardly any money, because we didn't have a lot of money.
Right.
And you're not supposed to spend your own money.
That's what they say.
And we spent our own money and we optioned the book ourselves. And right after that, options went out for Funny Farm and for Quick Change and a bunch of other. And so if we had been 6 months later, this movie wouldn't have gotten made the way it was anyway, because we wouldn't have been involved. So we optioned the book. We had a two-pronged plan.
Okay.
Just in case, I wrote a version of the screenplay. I wrote a draft of the screenplay. It was unspeakably bad. I'm not a screenwriter.
Okay.
Meanwhile, in Hollywood, Ned's sister became interested in the story because it's a great book, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, the producer who just passed away a couple of years ago, Jerry Weintraub.
Okay.
Jerry Weintraub had just announced $100 million production fund. This is it doesn't sound like a lot now because they pay $100 million at the drop of a hat. But back then, in 1985, somebody gets $100 million, they could make a bunch of movies.
Yes.
The trouble is, Jerry Weintraub had no intention of making movies with that money. What he did was he stole most of it and he gave out bits of it to his friends. And one of the friends that he gave the money to, he gave $500,000 to Nancy Dowd to write the script for Good Vibes. And we know that he had no intention of making the movie because the day that she submitted the script, he exercised his option to abandon the project.
Oh.
The same day. Now, however, there are other producers in Hollywood.
Right.
And David Giler, who you might recognize from movies like Alien,
Sure,
television shows like The Rifleman, David Giler was able to go in and make a deal at Paramount, and that's how the movie got made. We fooled it. We fooled ourselves. I mean, I was walking around after optioning the book and telling people that we were going to make this movie. And by the way, my script, my version of the script, which was horrendous, was called Let It Ride. I called the script Let It Ride.
Where did you come up with the name?
I was trying to figure out a better name than Good Vibes for the movie. And I used the working title Letting It Ride. And I showed the screenplay to a friend of mine, Mark Horowitz, who had written some screenplays. And he said to me, "You shouldn't call it Letting It Ride. You should just call it Let It Ride." So I changed the name to Let It Ride. And that's the name that went out on my script. Now, I never discussed it with Nancy Dowd. In fact, I've never met Nancy Dowd.
You've never met Nancy Dowd?
No, Nancy
It's a little
Dowd.
strange, don't you think? It sounds a little odd. No?
Nancy lives in Antigua, or at least the last time I heard she did.
Okay.
She keeps to herself. She took a pseudonym. She took a nom de screen of Ernest Morton for this film.
Yes.
As she has for a lot of her scripts. I don't want to speak ill of her because I don't know if she's dead yet. But put it this way, she's not a sociable person.
Okay.
But for some reason, and so I'll never know why she liked my title. Ned didn't like my title. He didn't like Let It Ride. He didn't want to call it Let It Ride. But when Nancy's script came in, Let It Ride was on the title page, which is my title.
Well, I mean, if it makes you feel better, I think it's a better title. So
I think it's a better title too. That's why I changed it. But Good Vibes is the name of the book, and the book is amazing.
It is truly.
So we went along with David Giler's plan, and David Giler, who died last year, his agent, Jeff Berg, and David Giler tried to get the project away from me and Ned. We owned the project. And one day, our lawyer, David Hollander, called me up and said, "There's something funny going on." I said, what are you talking about? I think Jeff Berg and David Giler are trying to cut you guys out of the picture. And Ned got very upset about it. But I said, "Don't worry, we own it. We own the option.
Right.
They can't do it. They can't do it without us." So we get closer to production, and they exercise the pay or play option on us, informing us that we're not needed. David Giler goes down to Florida, looks around, realizes that he's got a director who loves to make commercials but doesn't know the first thing about features, and he needs people to help him make the movie. And so we went down to Florida and made the movie.
So you were out until he got down there.
We were out until David Giler realized it was more than he wanted to do.
Okay.
So he got me and Ned to come down, and I worked a lot, mainly with my friend Wolf Kruger, who was the production designer. I had worked with him previously on Michael Cimino's Year of the Dragon.
Oh.
And we hired him to be the production designer on Let It Ride. He was a friend of ours from Montreal.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a lot of fun. That's how the movie got made. But basically, David Giler wanted to steal the project from us. I never found out how he expected to do it because, that said that I owned the property.
It seems like there's so many times I hear a story, and this is kind of what it is. Oh, these guys, they don't know what they're doing. I've been in this business forever. Let me just come and just take that.
I had a phone call like that with him. The lawyer told me that something funny was going on, so I called up Giler on the telephone.
Right.
I was in New York. He was in Los Angeles. I called him up. I said, is there some problem that I should know about? And he started yelling at me. How many movies have you produced?
Oh, my God.
Why am I talking to you? And, of course, at that time, I hadn't produced any movies. And the reason I was talking to him was because I had heard that he and Jeff Berg were plotting against us. Years later, I ran into Jeff Berg at the Cannes Film Festival with my late friend, Stuart Kleinman, who was, I grew up with him, went to school with him. He was the guy who gave me the idea for the movie State of Grace. And we were together at Cannes. And we ran into Jeff Berg, who was Stuart's boss at the time. And he introduced me to Jeff, who I'd never met. And I said, "Hi, remember me from Let It Ride?"
Uh-huh.
And he wouldn't look me in the face, wouldn't look me in the eye. He goes, "Yeah, I remember." They all remember.
Jeez.
Whenever the people who screw you always remember.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do.
Anyway, he ended up not being able to screw us, but we got screwed anyway because you said you went to see it when it opened.
I did.
When the movie opened in New York, the ad was for the new Angelica Theater on Houston Street and Broadway in the Cable Building. It was a brand new theater, the Angelica Cinemas on Houston Street. And there was the nice big ad and all the show times and everything. And my wife and I lived at Bleecker and McDougal, and we walked the 5 blocks over to the Angelica and found a construction site.
Wait, what are you telling me? What are you telling me?
The theater was not open yet. There were ads in the New York Times with show times. So if you were looking for the movie, I mean, we talk about the things that made the movie fail at the box office.
Right.
One of the things that made it fail at the box office was there were ads in the newspaper for a theater which had not yet opened its doors. And then I went up to I wanted to see a theater with the movie in it. So I went up to Times Square and I went into a theater that it was actually playing in. And there were like 5 people in the theater. So for me, it was not an auspicious opening day.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like it. Here's something that I just learned, right? So I was looking for the Siskel and Ebert review of the movie, which I used to watch that show.
Ebert liked it.
Okay, here's what I can tell you. There is no episode where they review it in 1989. That weekend, they review everything else except that movie. And then in 1992... there is a Guilty Pleasures episode where Gene Siskel it's on his list. And when he shows the clips and he talks about, you know what, this movie, it's great, it's fantastic, blah, 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 blah. And at the time, Ebert says, "I've never heard of this movie. When did you see this? We didn't review this. I don't even know about this film." And I'm just thinking, how is it possible that a movie that's being released from Paramount Pictures and it's got a major star in it, how is it that it is so buried that somebody like Roger Ebert in 1992 wasn't aware of that?
And I'll add to that story. It went later on. Mm-hmm. It went on to Ebert's Guilty Pleasures list. And when I ran into Ebert at Cannes again one year, and he had positively reviewed 3 films that I did. I believe he liked Let It Ride, he liked State of Grace, and he liked Fresh. And I thanked him. I went up to him, and I had never met him before, but he was a very nice man. And I went up to him and I said, you've reviewed the first 3 films that I produced very well, and I'm grateful to you. And he was very gracious about it. But you ask why it happens.
Yes, why
the people who run the studios. Mm-hmm. Who make the marketing decisions are morons. Somebody spent money
Absolutely.
Good money.
Right.
Good money.
Yes.
Putting an ad in the New York Times for the shows at the Angelica Film Center, which hadn't opened yet. Okay. So it's hard for me to reconcile with the people who I know in marketing and the people who I know now who are in charge of that sort of thing. I don't actually personally know anyone stupid enough to put an ad in the paper for a show for a theater that doesn't exist. But back then, I guess it happened all the time. They make the wrong judgments. As William Goldman famously said, nobody knows anything. And one of the things that people who don't know anything do is they bury good movies. They market them improperly. There are a couple of things about that movie that I think that when I watch it, I don't like it. I don't like very much. But they probably have nothing to do with the commercial failure of the movie. I don't like the score by Giorgio Moroder.
Okay.
Our joke was, and it's not far from the truth, when they hired Giorgio Moroder, the joke was he went into the office at Paramount, signed his contract, went out to the parking lot, opened the trunk of his car, which was a customized car called the Marauder, reached into the trunk, grabbed a handful of music sheets, went back in and said, "Here's your score." I mean, there are a couple of, I watched the movie recently, but I also watched it in preparation for this conversation.
Sure.
And I got to tell you, every time I hear the score, it sounds less appropriate to me. I mean, there are scenes in that movie where I'm waiting for a musical cue that would have made sense and improved it as a film. And they don't come because of Giorgio Moroder, who got the music out of the trunk of the Marauder.
Okay, so tell me about Joe Pytka and the choice of him as director. Obviously, this is his first movie. He comes from music videos, commercials. We all know this. But here he's getting this opportunity to direct his first feature film. So where did that choice come from?
That was David Giler's choice. They were talking about more established mainstream comedy directors at the time, people who had worked before with Richard Dreyfuss, people who were more familiar. And Ned and I were not involved in the choice of the director.
Okay.
We found out. And it was Giler who put Pytka on the show. And I don't know if you've listened to Pytka's commentary on the Blu-ray that came out. It's very funny to listen to because he's kind of I don't know how much you know about him, but we called him Conan the director.
Oh my God. Okay. All right. So real quick side note, I talked to Jay Cronley. In 2006, I interviewed him, and that is exactly what he told me. Conan the director. That's what he told me.
Conan the director.
Yes.
He first of all, he's 6'8" or something ridiculous like that. This is many years ago. I don't know what he's like now. He probably is fit because he's the kind of person who would keep himself fit, but he's much older. But when we worked with him, he could have picked me up with one hand and broke me in half. And what he did was he brought his core of commercial crew with him. He brought his AD. He brought his DP. And if you listen to his commentary, he taught us how to make movies. He taught us because when he got to Florida, nobody knew what they were doing. Now, in fact, Giler was a veteran producer.
Of course.
He just had gotten a little bit too lazy and had used a little bit too much cocaine by that time to actually want to work on the movie. So what he did was he used his influence to get his friends involved, like Terry Garr and various other members of the cast who did a wonderful cast. Giler used his influence to get the cast, and Giler picked Pytka. But I think Pytka must have adopted this attitude that they didn't know what they were doing, because when he got to Florida, before we got there, they didn't know what they were doing, and they weren't doing anything. They were Wolf Kruger, our friend, was already on the job, and his descriptions of what was going on there were not that complimentary. When Ned came down, he straightened things out, and by the time I got there, it was a real movie. But if you listen to Pytka talking, he taught us all how to make movies. Yes. And the fact of the matter is the attitude and demeanor of his people was always a matter of sort of humor to us, because clearly they were so deeply pampered and happy to be part of Joe Pytka's crew. That guy got paid a lot of money when he made commercials, and they spent a lot of money on his commercials, and his crews got paid very, very well. Mm-hmm. And they really, really, really liked the fact that they worked with him over and over again. Some of the actors in the movie were from Pytka's group, like John Roselius, who plays the security guard.
Okay, yeah.
And we had later on, he was in Ned and I did a movie called State of Grace, and unfortunately, John Roselius is murdered by Gary Oldman in that movie. But Roselius was a Pytka hire. Roselius is the guy from the Pytka commercial. This is your brain on drugs.
Oh my God!
Any questions? That's John Roselius.
How did I never realize that? I've seen that commercial more than I've seen Let It Ride. Holy cow.
Well, that's Joe Pytka and John Roselius.
Oh yeah.
And anyway, Pytka was chosen by Giler with the studio's approval. At the time, Paramount was run by people who I would characterize as not ethically reliable. One of the reasons that I spent a lot of time with Wolf Kruger in the art department was that there was a lot of deals that were made for materials and dressing that were ridiculous and and suffice to say that they only would have been made by people whose job it was to buy things for twice as much as they cost.
Okay.
So that they could,
Yes, I am aware of this. I have
figure out a way to take some of the money home with them. And it drove Wolf crazy. It drove me crazy. It drove Ned crazy. It drove everybody crazy because they wouldn't. Wolf specializes in monumental sets. He built the back lot in Wilmington, North Carolina, 3.5 blocks of Chinatown and Little Italy for Year of the Dragon, Michael Cimino's movie. He built the town in Malta for Popeye. He built 2 towns for We're No Angels. He specializes in monumental sets. And the only set that he was able to build for Let It Ride, according to his wishes, was the bar. Originally, the Jockey Club set was twice as big, but because they had to pay twice as much for the tables and twice as much for the lamps, they had to cut back on his plan. This is always, unfortunately, happens a lot. When you have a real genius production designer like Wolf Kruger,
all right, so that
people look over his shoulder and try to get him to not spend as much money.
So the Jockey Club, is that filmed at Hialeah Park?
Oh, everything was filmed at Hialeah, except for the bar. So the bar was built elsewhere, but it was nearby.
Can you tell me where it was? Because I will tell you, Randy, you may be amused, but I have looked for it, and of course, because I live, I can drive to Hialeah, and
it's not a real bar.
I know that now.
It was a built set.
But here's the thing. You see them walking across the street to it. So I remember thinking, it's got to be a bar across the street from Hialeah Park. But no.
It wasn't a bar.
No.
It was a set.
Okay.
And if you want me to,
yes.
Right now I'm trying to empty out this house. And among the other things, I'm coming across all of my papers from all of the films that I've worked on. And it's possible that at some point I can find the location list and tell you what the address was of the. But I'm not sure that I have. I'm not sure that I have that list. It's possible that I don't. So don't. But whatever it is,
sure.
It was a built set.
Okay, and
it was not a bar.
So also the Chinese restaurant in the opening scene.
I believe that was shot in Los Angeles.
Oh, okay. All right.
He had originally, I could be wrong about that. I'd have to ask Ned about that. I wasn't around for that.
Okay.
That was an addition because if you looked at the Blu-ray
yes.
of the movie, you saw that there were a bunch of scenes that were a little bit skewed toward a more dark or a more serious approach to the story, more of an emphasis on the pathology of compulsive gambling, and that stuff was cut out.
Yes, it was.
And it was, what remains is the book, which was unrelentingly hilarious, and certain scenes like the Chinese restaurant scene that were meant to set up the idea of luck and following rules of luck and not upsetting the forces that control luck.
So that scene, was that scene always supposed to be there, that Chinese restaurant scene? Because I'm always under the impression that maybe that was added later on after they did maybe an initial cut and it wasn't happy, and so, okay, you have to go back and do this other scene.
I have to say that I do not remember. I would have to find my copy of Nancy's original script.
Okay.
And see whether it's there. I mean, we're talking about 1988.
Yeah, there's no fault in not remembering things from all the way back, so don't worry about anything like that.
I always had the impression that it was put in there to replace the darker stuff.
Okay, see,
that really didn't belong.
Yes,
but I don't really remember exactly how that happened. I wasn't around for the shooting of that.
Okay, yeah, because it's one of those things where that scene seemingly sets up the rest of the movie so perfectly that without that scene, it just, it seems like you're really missing something.
I was actually surprised when I saw the darker stuff. The additional footage on the Blu-ray, because that was not in Nancy's script. I mean, Nancy's script was the book. Mm-hmm. It was a great lesson for me, because I had tried, as I said, to write a version of the screenplay myself, and I was not a writer. So I was using all these idiotic techniques that you get from instruction books on how to write a screenplay.
Okay, sure.
And it just went, I followed all the instructions as best I could, and it just went horribly, horribly wrong. And then I look at Nancy's script, and it looks so effortless, but it takes a certain kind of intense talent. I mean, she's a very talented writer. And to put that book onto the screen the way she did, onto the page so that it could be put on the screen the way she did, is really was pretty amazing. And what was amazing about it was that she changed so little. Mm-hmm. It's so like the book.
It is. It is like the book. Absolutely, yeah.
And when you watch adaptations, you often see departures from the adaptations, and I understand why that happens. It's because people don't know how to handle the book. That's what happened to me. What the script that I wrote was like went off in tangents that I don't even want to think about it, for no reason at all, just because I didn't know what I was doing. She knew what she was doing, and she really got the book onto the screenplay page.
Okay, all right. So let me ask you about Richard Dreyfuss. Whose idea was it to have Dreyfuss as Trotter?
It was Giler's idea. I have to give Giler that credit. Giler was an old Hollywood hand, and he knew everybody, and he had made giant movies. Mm-hmm. So when he yelled at me in order to get me off the scent of whatever chicanery he and Jeff Berg were up to, he wasn't actually lying about it. He actually had the credentials to say to a person like me, "How many movies have you produced?" Right. Because I hadn't produced any movies. So he was able, he was a friend of Terry Garr's. He just asked these people, it was not a difficult job casting the movie for him, and for the people, and for the casting people he worked with, because it's a great script. I mean, you got, and everybody thought it was going to be a popular movie, except the people who were in charge of actually selling it, who didn't seem to understand it.
Yeah, it was supposed to be released about a month later, right? Like towards the end of September, early October. That was the initial, and then they moved it up to August. Does that sound familiar?
I don't remember how that came about, or why.
Okay, so there you go. That was going to be my question there. Do you know if Paramount, how they felt about the movie? Because something tells me that maybe they did not have confidence in it.
I'm sure they didn't have confidence in it. The people who were running Paramount at the time, as I said before, I don't consider them to be trustworthy and reputable people. I worked for Paramount a few years later on the firm.
Okay.
And they had tightened up, they had changed management, and they had tightened up the ship to the point where on Let It Ride, if somebody wanted to buy, cast iron light stands for the Jockey Club and wanted to call up the manufacturer and offer them twice as much money as they actually cost,
right,
they could get away with it. Yeah. On the firm, I had trouble getting reimbursed for Sidney Pollack's hotel bill because they wanted an itemized list of his phone calls. That's how they did it 180-degree fiscal. And that's fine. They were looking after the money by that time. Sure. They were making sure that people weren't, stealing money anymore. But it was a different regime. It was a different atmosphere.
Yeah.
But I really had that experience where I was running the Cayman Island location. And when Sidney came to scout in the Caymans, it had been my habit from the beginning of my career to trust people that I worked for. And so I used my American Express card to pay Sidney's hotel bill. And then I found, I got a telephone call from Elton McPherson, the Straight Arrow production auditor.
Oh my God!
Who was put in by Paramount to make sure that nobody was stealing money, and he wouldn't reimburse my. I had to pay I said, Elton, I have to pay my American Express bill, and he said, well, then just get me an itemized list of Sidney's phone calls. And I said, are you telling me that you're going to go over the list of Sidney Pollack's phone calls that he made from the hotel here during the scout, and you looking for what? Things that you can exclude? Things that you will disallow?
Yes.
No. I just got an itemized list of the phone calls. I sent it to him, and he paid me.
Wow.
I mean, that's actually how you're supposed to do it.
Yeah, I suppose I could see that. I
mean, if you're, by the time we were working on the firm, budgets had increased quite a bit, and that movie was probably budgeted around $70 million at the time, which was at the high end of what was going on back then. And that's the correct way to run a movie. You make sure that everything adds up and that every penny that is spent on something for the movie.
Sure. All right. So you filmed down here in South Florida, and I live down here, and I know what things are like down here, and I know what they were like at the time. So tell me about what I'm going to guess is potential crippling corruption of local South Florida people, maybe politicians, anybody that you had to deal with, track people, anything along those lines?
None of it reached a level that affected the production. None of it.
Okay.
None of it.
Okay.
None of it. We were, first of all, you've been to Hialeah, I assume.
Yes.
It's a 15-minute drive from the road to the clubhouse. I mean, you go, it's far away. It's not like you're in the middle of town where somebody. Oh yeah, no. Where people are aware of your presence. Nobody. We were a contained unit, far away from everybody else. Nobody really paid attention to what we were doing. There were not encroachments. It's a very large area. The stable was still operating not for racing purposes, but for stabling purposes. While we were there, for example, the Clydesdales came through, and they were stabled at Hialeah for a while because they were in South Florida, and they needed a place to be stabled for a while, and be driving to work and see this horse. You get out of the car and walk over to the horse, and you come up to the horse's knee is like here. They're incredibly large. So. If you're talking about corruption, the only corruption that I encountered was on the part of people who had been sent by Paramount Pictures to participate in the making of the movie.
Okay.
I didn't have anything to do with the securing the Hialeah location. There must have been a pretty good deal made because we owned it. I mean, it was ours. when the art department needed something for a set, we had the run of the place. You could walk into any office. There was tons and tons of stuff, stationery, paperwork, all sorts of stuff that all we had to do was take it and use it if we wanted to use it as set dressing. Mm-hmm. There was nobody there who told us we couldn't do anything.
Okay.
We had one of the best horse wranglers in the business, Rudy Ugland, who was legendary. It was legendary in Hollywood. In fact, he had worked on Year of the Dragon. He was in charge of the horses on Year of the Dragon, so I knew him already. Wolf Kruger knew him already, but he's a legend. And he bought some retired thoroughbred horses and arranged the races for the early morning, mm-hmm. so that the horses could run when it was still cool. So every morning we filmed races in the cool of the morning, and then the horses went back to the stable, and then we did the stuff with the actors.
So they were retired race horses.
They were retired race horses. They were, and we bought them.
What do you do after you've bought the horses and then the movie's over?
Well, this is a good Rudy Ugland story. Rudy found out that the production manager, who was one of the people who was making those interesting deals with vendors, had arranged to sell the horses to be slaughtered and used for meat, for animals. And when he found out, when Rudy found out, that this deal was in the offing, I didn't see it happen, but I'm told that he almost killed the person who was responsible for trying to make that deal.
Okay.
The horses were adopted by crew people who lived in Florida, who had places to put them and to house them, and they were not harmed.
Okay.
Rudy wouldn't have allowed. I mean, he loved horses, and they were, he was in charge of them, and he wasn't going to let anything like that happen.
Oh my God, for meat, Jesus.
Yeah, meat.
One thing that
get money
is very underrated about this movie is how good those horse races look. Those horse races look fantastic.
Those are real thoroughbred horses, and Rudy Ugland was the wrangler who knew horses, knew horse racing. My producing partner, Ned Dowd, was a horse fanatic. In fact, the book, Good Vibes, takes place at the Arkansas Derby. It's the day of the Arkansas Derby. And it's at Oak Lawn Park in Little Rock. And after we optioned the book, Ned and I went to the Arkansas Derby with Jay Cronley, the author.
Okay.
We went to the hot springs.
Okay, yeah.
Not Little Rock, Hot Springs, Arkansas. We went to the hot springs, which is an interesting thing to experience. And we attended the Arkansas Derby, and Ned and Jay were figuring out their bets. I didn't have very much experience betting, so I didn't do very much. Jay's wife sat there quietly with a racing form, marking it up, and she bet $2 on every race and won every race.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. By the end of the weekend that we were there, I didn't lose that much money because I'm not much of a gambler, but Jay and Ned had lost a good amount of money. But Jay's wife had picked a winner on every race and had bet $2.
She's on my list of people to talk to, actually, in a few episodes to talk to her.
Honey?
Yeah.
We had a lot of fun. She was, I haven't seen her since then, but she's a very nice lady.
So, all right. So tell me a little bit about your interactions with Jay Cronley.
Well, you know him. You've talked to him. He was great. He was just a delightful person. He was a hilariously funny person. You'd sit with him, and the expressions that he used and his tone of voice was, oh, horse shit. He was always saying things like that, and he was hilarious. It was great fun to be around him. He was not around during shooting, of course. He came to visit, but he lived in he lived in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Yeah, Oklahoma.
He wasn't around during the shooting, but I think he was pretty happy with the movie. He and Ned Ned made a video of the World Series of Poker, where he went to the World Series of Poker with Jay, and Jay entered the World Series of Poker, and he ran out of money after the first day or something and left. So it ended up not being.
Where's this video though? There's video of this.
There was a video, and I have to, I've never actually seen it, and Ned keeps talking about it. And I have to, I keep not getting a copy of it.
Yeah.
I have to somehow find it.
Okay, so the theme, the idea of this podcast is to not only just discuss Let It Ride, my favorite movie, but to do it scene by scene. So I do have a scene for us to discuss. So let's break that down if you don't mind.
Okay.
So this is the scene. It's the first race. So this is the scene where Trotter and Looney, they first head out to the railing. And anything that you can remember, I don't know if you were there, maybe anything that you have, but this is where, so Trotter and Looney, they go out to the track, and they meet Vincent, Tony Longo, and he shoves everybody down. That's his job. He makes money. Trotter does his instant math inside his head.
Right. Which is from the book.
Yes. Determines that it's $1,400 a day. And Longo, seemingly, this is a recurring thing where whatever he's thinking, the person he's thinking it about responds to him. And he says...
He actually said out loud in that scene.
Yes.
In a couple of other scenes, like when he goes in the men's room, and he calculates how much the bathroom attendant is making. He doesn't say anything, but he actually says out loud to Tony Longo, that's a lot of money. He
does, yes.
So you can sort of figure that he heard him say that, and he was responding to it when he said, for being big.
Yes. So do you remember, were you there when they filmed this one?
I was not on the set while we were filming that. No, I was elsewhere. In the complex.
Oh, okay, but you were probably there that day. You just weren't.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. So what might you have been doing while they were filming? Confess. Come on, Randy, spill it.
I spent most of my time trying to straighten out the expenditures of the art department, because stuff was going on that I thought shouldn't be going on, and
right.
Ned had more to do with the day-to-day running of the production than I did. One of the reasons I did what I did was because Wolf Kruger, our friend,
sure,
wanted to have somebody looking over the shoulder of the people who were handling the money, because he was responsible for the budget of the art department, and if it wasn't all going up on the screen, he wanted to know about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I sort of worked with the art department for most of the time that I was there, and I was less involved with the day-to-day working of the production.
Oh, okay.
The other thing was, I personally didn't find it pleasant to be around Joe Pytka.
Okay.
So I sort of didn't put myself in his path often. I just didn't find him to be a very congenial person. When I was introduced to him, Ned said, "This is Randy. He optioned the book," and Pytka didn't look at me. First of all, didn't shake my hand, and said, "This movie has nothing to do with the book," and turned around and walked away. Okay. That was my introduction to Joe Pytka. That's what a nice person he was. So I figured, first of all, it would interest Nancy Dowd to find out that the movie had nothing to do with the book, since the book has all of the major beats of the book.
Yeah.
The movie has all of the major beats of the book, and is really a very, very faithful adaptation of the book. But according to Pytka, it has nothing to do with the book. The movie has nothing to do with the book.
Yeah, this recalls, and actually I mentioned this in another episode, but when I talked to Cronley and I asked him about Pytka, he told me his interaction was basically this, introduction, Jay says hello, and Pytka says to him, "Listen, I don't want your book getting in the way of my movie." And Cronley said, "All right, that's it. I'm out of here." That's what he told me.
Yep.
Those are his words. So sounds accurate to you.
Meanwhile, the script was the book. And Pytka tried. If you, like I said, you look at the stuff that was cut out in the extras of the Blu-ray, and you see that there was stuff that Pytka was trying to put in there that didn't belong there at all. Mm-hmm. Real hard. Like pathology. The pathology of compulsive gambling wasn't the subject of that movie.
Yeah. It really throws off the enjoyment that you're supposed to have. That's right. One thing that gets me about the opening scene really kind of is such a downer. Like, to actually be in a Gamblers Anonymous meeting and then we're supposed to have such a fun day at the track. It really kind of conflicts. And so when I saw it, I was like, oh, wow, this is very interesting. It's an interesting scene, but it's like...
It's lucky he wasn't allowed to keep it in the movie. Anyway, Joe Pytka is not, listed in the pantheon of Hollywood directors of features.
Yeah.
Put it that way.
Yes. It's interesting.
I think he did a pretty good job with this movie, all things considered.
It looks great. It zips along. He went around basically telling everybody that, no one other than he was contributing anything worthwhile to the film. And, let him think that. Fine. It's funny to listen to him talk on the commentary. Do you have people ask you about this movie a lot?
People do talk about this movie sometimes.
Okay.
And it's gratifying, it's a good movie.
It's a great movie.
It's a great movie.
There you go. It is a great movie, okay? It is a great movie. I absolutely love it.
Except for the music, I would have hired a different. I would have hired a different composer.
Okay. All right. So anyway, you know what? Let me just sum up this scene very quickly with the one thing I find very interesting about this scene. And so we're finishing it where the race happens, it finishes, and we're now waiting for the photo. But what I always find interesting is Looney's attitude regarding the race. Like, he is just more and more not rooting for his friend to win. Here he's just like, oh my goodness, you know what? If blurred image, that's Marty's horse. He'd be tickled to pieces if that won, while Trotter is just dying seemingly in anguish in this moment.
This was also a feature of real life horse players and was a feature of the book, which is nobody likes a winner who comes out of nowhere and doesn't, unless everybody wins. They were mad at him for winning because he didn't tell them he was going to win, but he did tell them he was going to win. He did. He told everybody. Looney gave him the information, for God's sake.
Yes.
And when he yells at him at the end of the race, where he says, "You're the unluckiest person in the world," and that's the way those people actually interact at the racetrack in real life. If you stumble onto a winner, a big winner, and nobody else knows about it but you, even if they really do know about it and they forgot they knew about it, you're an asshole because you won. It's part of what makes the book so realistic, even though it's silly and funny, but there's a superstitious element to the way people operate at the track, and there's a social order that has to be maintained, and nobody gets more sympathy than a loser, and nobody is more bitterly regarded than a winner.
Yeah. Okay, so Randy, this film, it does not do particularly well. What does this do for you as Randy, your career? Does this negatively impact you? Is the fact that you've produced a movie and it got made and it was released, does that positively impact you? How does it affect you? I mean, you've got another movie that comes out the next year. We've discussed State of Grace. So, what was?
I tell you what negatively impacted me.
Okay.
What negatively impacted me was, as I said, the Ned and Alan Nichols and I were sitting on the somewhere in the middle of Dallas, and we stupidly decided that we would improve our condition, our working conditions, if we produced our own movies, without knowing what that meant. what it meant is you're dealing with people like David Giler and Jeff Berg and Joe Pytka, and you're not in control. So the ease with which we got the picture made and the speed with which we got it made. I mean, I optioned the book in 1985, towards the end of the year of 1985. We were shooting in 1988. When it became known among my circle of friends that I had spent my own money to option this book, there were people who thought the idea was completely ridiculous and said so to me. And I was annoyed by that. But the fact of the matter is, it wasn't ridiculous. It was completely ridiculous. It was ridiculous that we had the luck that we had in being able to option a Jay Cronley book before anybody else did. It was sheer luck that Nancy Dowd had a hole in her schedule and that Jerry Weintraub was handing out hundreds of thousands of dollars to his friends. You know, he had to get rid of that $100 million somehow. He didn't make any movies. I think he made like My Stepmother is an Alien, and that's the only movie he made. And then suddenly the money was gone. Where did it go? He paid his friends money to do things. Like he paid Nancy $500,000 to write this script and abandoned the project the day she handed in the script. He had no intention of making the movie. He needed to spend some of that $100 million so that he could keep the rest of it. And you don't keep money by actually spending it on a movie. So in that respect, we got fooled into thinking how easy it was. So before we were actually making Let It Ride, I got started on another project. And I had not yet learned my lesson. It took me a long time to learn the lesson that I ultimately learned. I was sitting around one Sunday, and my late friend Stuart Kleinman called up and said, "Did you read Jimmy Traub's article in the Sunday Times magazine about the Westies?" And I said no. And I had so happened, Stuart and Jimmy Traub and I had all gone to high school together and junior high school together. And I had just had dinner with Jimmy Traub at a friend's house a few weeks before that. So I picked up the magazine and I read the story about the Westies. It's a fascinating story. And I called up Jimmy Traub and I said, I'd like to option your article. And I did it again because I thought that's what you do. And at that time, Ned Dowd had brought me into the circle of the producer, Michael Houseman, who produced Places in the Heart and all of the Milos Forman films except for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and, Silkwood. And Ned had been working with him. And he had brought me in to the organization as the Chicago location manager on a David Mamet film called Things Change.
Oh, great movie.
And at that point, because most of the movie was shot in Lake Tahoe, but I handled the Chicago location because I had lived there before. Earlier I had quit the movie business because I wasn't earning enough money, and I worked for Hammaker Schlemmer writing mail order catalogs, and they moved from New York to Chicago. So I had lived in Chicago for a while, and when it came time to set up the Chicago location for Things Change, Ned told Mike, Randy can do it, he knows Chicago. So I went and I did that. And at that time, Mike Houseman had decided he wanted to start generating his own productions instead of just, getting a call from the studio or getting a call from a director and saying, I want you to make this movie with me. And when we finished Things Change, we came back to New York, and all of a sudden, the first project that Mike wanted to do was my Westies project. So I had two extremely lucky circumstances right off the bat. Of course, the third time, when I tried to develop another project and I spent all the money that I'd made on Let It Ride and on State of Grace on this third project, and of course, that never got made. So I learned my lesson. What I had actually done, what people had warned me not to do, was the warning is correct. And it's really only foolish people or very, very, very smart people who can have a success like that. Mm-hmm. I don't count myself among the geniuses. I was very, very lucky. The first two projects that I wanted to make became movies. And they had serious problems, both of them, involved with them. I mean, talk about Let It Ride having ads in the paper for showtimes at a theater that didn't exist on opening weekend in New York. When State of Grace opened, the Sunday Arts and Leisure had two separate articles, one about the role of malls in modern gangster movies, and another one, both of them speaking very, very highly of State of Grace.
Okay.
On the opening weekend. So I was very excited, and I immediately started paging through the Arts and Leisure section to see what the ad looked like.
Okay.
And there wasn't an ad. Okay. There wasn't an ad. It's because at that point, Orion Pictures had run out of money.
Oh, okay.
And they didn't have money. They were basically starting to close down the enterprise. Mm-hmm. And so there I was, elated that there was already advanced critical approval of the film, and there weren't any ads in the paper. So if you wanted to see it, there wasn't any way for you to. There wasn't, there was no internet then.
Yeah,
you had to look in the newspaper at the ad to find out what time to go to the movie, and you couldn't do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that movie went down the toilet as well, and that's a movie that a lot of people tell me they like also.
It's great. Like Let It Ride. It's a great movie. Yes.
I mean, but it was luck that got both of those movies made. I was a person who grew up loving movies. The only reason I was involved in movies was because I loved movies. The only reason I was involved in production was because I loved making movies. And the only reason that I was able to make those first two movies was sheer dumb luck. And it worked the way it was supposed to work the third time out when I lost all the money that I had spent on optioning another book that would have made a very good movie. And I had a lot of close calls with people who, calling me, get ready Monday, get the paperwork together.
Right.
They want to make a deal. And then nothing. I was working with the late Dean Reisner, who wrote Dirty Harry. I was on the phone with him for weeks talking about the character in this book that I had optioned, and he wanted to write the script. And we were about to make a deal, and then all of a sudden it just disappeared. And I never found out why. It's just like it was over.
Sometimes
and that's the way it normally works. Yes. So that when I first optioned Good Vibes, and people were saying what an idiot I was, technically they were right, even though it worked out.
Did you feel like you were maybe a bit of a genius for a short time?
No.
Like, all right, let me just finish. So the idea, though, that you got a Cronley book before the other people did. So
I didn't know about it when we optioned the Cronley book. I had, first of all, just read the other books as a matter of course because I liked his writing. Mm-hmm. I didn't know they were getting ready to make movies of the other ones. I had no idea. So when we optioned the book, it wasn't like, oh boy, we just got in under the wire. I only found that out later.
All right. So when you found out that, hey, George Roy Hill is going to make another book by this author, did you feel, oh, okay, that's got to be a good sign?
No, because it was, we'd already, it had nothing to do with us.
Randy, you give yourself no credit, man. You give yourself no credit.
Well, I tend to not give myself a lot of credit. I mean, it wasn't genius that first of all, Ned told me about the book.
Yeah.
It was a book that he liked because he's a horse player, and it's a beautiful book for a horse player.
Yes.
And I went and got the option on it because I wanted to make the movie. Mm-hmm. And as I said, the process that led to the movie being produced so quickly was not normal. It's not the way it normally goes. When they say don't spend your own money on these things,
yeah,
they're right. For people like me, I lived in New York. I was not a Hollywood person.
Right.
The only reason I was involved in movies because I love movies. I didn't, when I called up David Giler to try and find out exactly what he and Jeff Berg were doing to undermine me and Ned, he taught me a Hollywood lesson by yelling at me. And, he never told me what they were doing. I never found out what specifically they were doing in order to try to get rid of us. All I knew was that I had the option, and they couldn't get it away. They couldn't make the movie without me.
Yeah. You had it. You weren't going to let it go.
I never figured out what they thought they were going to do to get rid of us.
Yeah.
And I don't care. But the fact is, I was not a player. I was not a Hollywood player. I didn't know. And frankly, through my career, I can say pretty definitively that most of the very, very bad things that happened to me during my career either happened in Hollywood or as a direct result of something that happened in Hollywood. It's a terrible, terrible place. And the fact that I never considered moving to the West Coast, it's just, it's a disgusting place. My brother lives there. He's an actor. I don't know how he can stand it. It's awful. And the people are awful. I mean, not the people the people who you go to work with every day.
Right. Okay.
Are great people. The people who make the decisions and figure out ways of making those people's lives miserable.
Yeah.
Those people are not nice people. And those are the people that I'm complaining about.
I gotcha, Randy.
But I'm not the only one who complains about it.
No, you're not the first person, actually. As it turns out, it's not just you. So,
Right. No. But and I admire very much the people who have a better experience than I had in dealing with that establishment, because there are smarter people and there are people who are more politically adept. And there are nicer people and people who are more skilled at navigating this sort of thing than I ever was. And I admire them for having principled careers where they're admired and they're liked and they're known as honest, straight shooting people, and they treat people well and they're well thought of. And I admire those people. They are there. However, when you want to build a career out of New York City in the motion picture industry, it limits you. It limits you if you are not one of them. If you don't have the sensibility of one of those monsters.
Yeah, I gotcha. Randy, thanks, man. Thank you for doing
You're
this.
Welcome.
And again, I'm actually kind of excited. I can say to somebody, thank you for making this movie.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure.
For all the anguish that you went through.
No, but it was.
I appreciate it.
I love doing it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Jockey Club. This episode was hosted and produced by me, Dan Delgado. And a big thank you to my guest, producer Randy Ostrow. Thank you for sharing so much of what happened while you were making this movie that I love. I will also share with you that while I spoke with Randy, he was wearing his Let It Ride crew jacket, which was an impressive flex. Our theme music is from Epidemic Sound. Our cover art is by Sean Labrie. If you enjoyed this episode, and I hope you did, then you can help the show out by buying me a coffee. Yes, that is actually a thing. There is a link in the show notes on how to do it. Now, if you're saving up all of your pennies to bet on the 4-horse, I understand. You can still support the show by leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or maybe some other app that you may be using that also takes reviews. Do not be shy. Feel free to do it. If you want to contact me, you can send me an email. It's dan@moviemaker.com. I am on Twitter @_Dan_Delgado. Or even better yet, I'm on the Repod app, which is a great way to not only to listen to podcasts, but to interact with podcast hosts like me. Find it in your app store, and then come on by and say hello. This has been Dan Delgado for the Jockey Club. And remember, sometimes you could be walking around lucky and not know it.